For generations, the idea of the middle class wasn't just how much money you made. It was basically the engine of the global economy. It was this core promise, right? That if you worked hard, you could build a stable, secure, and even better life. But that promise, well, it's in real trouble. So let's dive into this, because if you want to understand the anxiety so many of us feel, you have to look at these powerful, kind of hidden forces that have totally reshaped our economic world. See, this isn't some abstract economic trend we're talking about. It's a deeply personal story for millions and millions of people. This quote just nails it. That fundamental belief that your kids will have it better than you did, that's just not a given anymore. And that is a massive shift, and it's fueling this deep sense of insecurity all over the world. So that leads us to the big question, the one we're really going to unpack here. What happened? What actually broke? Was it just one thing, or was it a whole series of these quiet, systemic changes that completely rewired the economy from the ground up? To figure that out, we have to go back and look at what that promise actually looked like when it was at its peak. Okay, let's rewind the clock. We're going back to the decades right after World War II. People often call this the Golden Age, and, for good reason. It wasn't perfect, not by a long shot, but it created this kind of blueprint for shared prosperity that really became the benchmark for everything that followed. Think about what this is really describing. It's not just a feeling. It's a specific economic system. It's an arrangement where you had booming productivity and tons of jobs, creating this virtuous cycle. And the crucial part is, the money from that growing economy was intentionally spread around in a way that lifted millions of families into a stable, growing middle class. Now, this right here, this slide shows you exactly when the social contract broke. Look at the left side. Back then, as companies got more productive and made more stuff, workers' paychecks grew right along with them. They were locked together. Now look at the right. That link? It's gone. It's snapped. And this decoupling of productivity from wages, that's not just a data point. It is the absolute key to understanding this entire story. So, yeah, that system, that social contract, it just didn't last. Starting around the 1970s, a bunch of really powerful global forces started to systematically pull that whole arrangement apart. This was the start of what you could call the Great Unraveling. So you basically get this 1-2 punch hitting the economy all at once. First, globalization opens up this massive global labor market. Now, companies can move production to wherever it's cheapest. And then, at the exact same time, you have new technologies that start automating routine jobs, which completely changed the nature of work and really weakened the bargaining power of workers. And this shows you the two sides of that coin perfectly. On the one hand, globalization gave us cheaper stuff, cheaper TVs, cheaper clothes, a clear win for us as consumers. But the price we paid for that was the hollowing out of the industrial base that had been the absolute bedrock of the middle class for decades. It was a huge trade-off, and the bill ended up being paid by factory workers and their communities. And here's the result. This is what it looks like. While worker productivity, the amount of value each worker creates, has shot up by more than 60% since the late 70s. Real wages for the average person have barely budged when you account for inflation. People were creating way more wealth for their companies, but they weren't getting a bigger slice of the pie. So where did all that new wealth go? All right, let's bring this right into the present day. Let's look at the pressures families are facing right now. Because these big structural shifts we've been talking about, they're not just abstract history. They show up at your kitchen table, in your bank account, every single day. This is what that squeeze actually feels like in real life. That golden age lifestyle, owning a home, a car, taking a family vacation, all on one salary, that's basically a fantasy for a lot of people now. Today, it often takes 2 full-time incomes just to keep your head above water. And while wages have stayed flat, the costs for the absolute pillars of a middle-class life, housing, healthcare, education, have just exploded. For generations, buying a home wasn't just about having a place to live. It was the #1 way families built wealth and financial security. It was your ticket to the middle class. But now, with housing prices in so many places completely disconnected from what local wages can possibly support, that fundamental pathway is just blocked for millions. A key door to moving up in the world is closing. So, back to that question, where did the money go? Well, this chart gives you a pretty stark visual answer. The overwhelming majority of economic growth over the past 40 years has been captured by a tiny fraction of people at the very top. The wealth didn't flow to labor through higher wages, it flowed to capital, to the people who own assets like stocks and real estate. And that, right there, is the defining feature of our modern economy. So, just as we're all trying to wrap our heads around the long-term effects of that first wave of automation, a brand new, way more powerful force is arriving on the scene: artificial intelligence. And this time, it's not just coming for routine manual jobs. I mean, just look at this list. These are not factory jobs. These are skilled, creative, white-collar professions that we all thought were safe from automation. With companies like OpenAI building these incredibly powerful models, and firms like NVIDIA creating the chips that make it all possible, AI is now set to disrupt the very knowledge work industries that were supposed to be our future. This brings up a really profound, almost existential question about the future of work itself. We're moving past simple automation into something more like cognitive outsourcing. In an economy where an AI can do the job of a financial analyst or a software developer or a graphic designer, what is the core economic value of a human being? Now, it's easy to look at all this as just an economic story, right? Just charts and income brackets. But the decline of the middle class has consequences that ripple out through the entire fabric of our society. A healthy middle class isn't a luxury. It's a core ingredient for a stable, functional democracy. A strong middle class creates this amazing positive feedback loop. Their spending drives demand in the economy, the hope of joining their ranks that fuels ambition and innovation. And critically, when a huge majority of people feel like they have a real stake in the system, it creates social cohesion and political stability. When that foundation starts to crack, all three of those pillars begin to wobble. And that really leaves us with this final, powerful idea. This isn't just about one group of people falling behind. This is a challenge to the fundamental architecture of our entire global economic system. Rebuilding those pathways to shared prosperity, that isn't just a social goal. It might be the single most critical economic challenge we face, because how we answer it will define the 21st century.